this episode, we're going to make business value feel like something you can recognize and use, not a vague phrase that only executives understand. When security leaders decide what to fund, what to delay, and what to stop, they are really deciding how to spend limited resources to protect what the organization values most. Beginners sometimes imagine that security investments should always go toward whatever sounds most technical or most powerful, but strategy works differently. Strategy asks what outcomes the business cares about, what could threaten those outcomes, and what security actions will reduce the most meaningful risk with the least waste. Business value drivers are the forces that create value for the organization, such as revenue, trust, reliability, efficiency, and compliance. And learning to decode them helps you choose security priorities that actually make sense. When you can connect security investments to value drivers, you are no longer guessing. You are steering. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.Author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A business value driver is a factor that directly affects the organization's ability to succeed, and it usually shows up as something leadership tracks or worries about. In many organizations, revenue is an obvious value driver, but revenue is not just money coming in. It is a result of customers choosing the organization, staying with it, and trusting it. Customer trust is another major driver because it affects sales, renewals, and reputation, and once trust is damaged, it can take years to rebuild. Operational reliability is a value driver because downtime interrupts business processes and can cause immediate financial loss and long-term customer frustration. Efficiency is a driver because organizations want to do more with less, reducing wasted time and effort. Compliance and legal standing can also be value drivers because failing them can lead to fines, contract loss, and forced changes. The reason these drivers matter for security is that they shape what leadership sees as urgent, which shapes what gets funded. If you learn to identify the drivers, you learn to predict what arguments will matter and what investments will be supported. Decoding value drivers begins with listening for business language that signals what the organization is optimizing for. When you hear phrases like time to market, customer experience, reduced churn, uptime, service levels, cost control, audit readiness, and brand reputation, you are hearing value drivers in action. These phrases are not just buzzwords. They represent real pressures the organization faces. For example, if time to market is a dominant driver, then the business values speed and competitive advantage, which means security must focus on guardrails that enable quick delivery without creating chaos. If customer trust is dominant, then security investments that reduce the chance of public incidents will be highly valued. If cost control is dominant, then security must emphasize efficiency, consolidation, and reducing waste. Your job as a strategic thinker is to translate these signals into security priorities that reduce risk to the outcomes leadership cares about. The exam often tests whether you can spot these signals and choose an approach that fits them. Once you identify value drivers, you can start mapping security outcomes to business outcomes, which is where investment decisions become defensible. Security outcomes include reduced likelihood of a breach, reduced impact of an incident, faster detection, faster recovery, better governance, and clearer accountability. Business outcomes include fewer disruptions, reduced financial loss, stable customer experience, protected reputation, and successful compliance. The bridge between them is impact. For example, if a security investment improves recovery speed, the business outcome is less downtime and less revenue loss. If a security investment improves access management, the business outcome might be reduced fraud and fewer unauthorized actions that damage trust. If a security investment improves governance and documentation, the business outcome might be smoother audits and fewer contract risks. When you build this mapping, you can explain why a specific investment matters without relying on fear or technical complexity. The point is not to make security sound scary. It is to make security sound relevant. A major beginner misconception is that security investments are always purely defensive, but strategic investments often have positive value beyond preventing loss. Some security improvements increase efficiency by reducing manual work increasing clarity, and standardizing processes. Some improvements reduce friction by making secure paths easier than insecure shortcuts, which increases productivity and reduces accidents. Some improvements enable new business opportunities, such as winning contracts that require certain security assurance or entering regulated markets where controls are a prerequisite. When security is framed only as a cost, it is always competing with projects that generate visible revenue. When security is framed as protecting and enabling value drivers, it becomes part of how the organization succeeds. This does not mean you exaggerate security benefits. It means you recognize the real value security can produce. Exam questions often reward answers that reflect this balanced framing because it shows strategic maturity. To steer smarter investments, you also need to understand that value drivers can conflict, and strategy is about balancing them. Speed to market might conflict with deep assurance because thorough review takes time. Cost control might conflict with redundancy because reliability often requires extra capacity. Customer experience might conflict with strict controls if controls are designed poorly and create friction. Security strategy does not pretend conflicts do not exist. It acknowledges them and chooses trade-offs that fit the organization's priorities and risk appetite. For example, if reliability is the top value driver, then investments in resilience, monitoring, and recovery may be prioritized even if they cost more. If speed is the top driver, then security may emphasize automation, clear standards, and reusable patterns that reduce repeated review delays. The best answers on a strategic exam often involve trade-offs that respect the dominant driver while still managing risk. If you choose an answer that ignores the dominant driver, it may sound secure but be strategically wrong. Another key element is understanding the difference between protecting value and measuring value, because investments need evidence. Leaders want to know whether money spent produced the intended outcome, and security must be able to show progress in ways the business cares about. Measuring value does not always require complicated metrics, but it does require clarity. If you invest in improving incident response, you might measure reduced time to detect and reduced time to recover, which connects to less downtime and less impact. If you invest in governance, you might measure fewer audit findings or faster completion of compliance tasks, which connects to contract stability and reduced legal exposure. If you invest in access controls, you might measure fewer unauthorized access incidents or reduced fraud. The exam tends to test whether you understand that strategy includes measurement, because without measurement, you cannot steer. Steering implies feedback, and feedback implies metrics tied to value drivers. Decoding value drivers also means understanding what the organization sells or delivers, because value is created differently in different models. A company that sells a subscription service depends heavily on availability and customer trust, because customers can cancel quickly if they are unhappy. A company that sells a product may depend on brand reputation and supply chain reliability. A healthcare organization may depend on patient safety, regulatory compliance, and trust, while also caring about operational efficiency. A bank may depend on fraud prevention, regulatory compliance, and customer confidence in financial integrity. The specific drivers differ, but the pattern is the same. Identify the outcomes that keep the organization alive and growing, then protect them. This helps you avoid a one-size-fits-all security mindset, because security strategy is always contextual. On the exam, contextual thinking often separates a strong answer from a generic one. When you move from value drivers to investment choices, it helps to think about two dimensions: how much value is protected and how quickly the benefit arrives. Some investments are long-term foundations, such as improving governance, clarifying roles, or building sustainable security processes. These may not show immediate visible change, but they reduce chaos and create consistency that pays off over time. Other investments are quicker risk reducers, such as addressing a high-exposure gap or improving recovery readiness, which can produce immediate protection for critical outcomes. Smarter steering means balancing foundational investments with targeted quick wins. If you only chase quick wins, the program becomes reactive and fragile. If you only chase foundations, the business may not feel progress and lose patience. Strategic security is the art of mixing both so the organization sees value now while building resilience for later. This balance is a common theme in strategic decision questions. A related idea is that not all risks threaten value drivers equally, and this is where prioritization becomes business first. An outage that affects a critical revenue system threatens revenue and trust directly, while a minor policy gap in a low-impact area might matter less in the short term. A data exposure involving sensitive customer information threatens trust and legal standing, while a small internal issue with limited access may be less urgent. Beginners sometimes treat all risks as equally alarming because they all sound bad, but strategic thinking ranks them by impact on value drivers. This does not mean you ignore smaller risks forever. It means you do not let them crowd out the work that protects what matters most. Exam questions often present multiple plausible initiatives and ask which to prioritize, and the best approach is to choose the one that reduces risk to the most important value driver given the context. You also need to recognize that security investments have costs beyond money, and those costs affect value drivers too. A control that frustrates users can reduce productivity, which harms efficiency. A process that slows releases can harm time to market, which harms competitiveness. A complex program that requires heavy maintenance can increase operational burden, which harms sustainability. Smarter steering accounts for total cost, meaning financial cost plus time cost plus friction cost. When you evaluate an investment, ask what it improves and what it might unintentionally worsen. A strategic choice is one where the benefits to key value drivers outweigh the costs and the organization can sustain the change. Sustainability is often overlooked by beginners, but it matters because unsustainable controls decay, get bypassed, or become shelfware. The exam tends to reward answers that consider sustainability because it reflects real-world strategy. As you get comfortable with value drivers, you can also learn to build business cases that do not rely on fear, because fear-based arguments can backfire. Fear can create urgency, but it can also create denial, fatigue, or resistance, especially if it feels exaggerated. A value-driven argument is calmer and more credible because it ties security work to outcomes leadership already cares about. Instead of saying we need this because attackers are everywhere, you can say this reduces the chance of downtime that would directly harm customer experience and revenue. Instead of saying we must buy this tool, you can say we need to improve recovery speed because reliability is a top business priority and current recovery would cause unacceptable disruption. This style of reasoning is central to strategic security leadership, and it is also the style that tends to match exam expectations. The exam wants you to choose options that are defensible and aligned, not options that are dramatic. To wrap up, decoding business value drivers is about learning what the organization is trying to achieve and using that knowledge to make smarter security investment decisions. You identify the drivers by listening for business language and observing what leadership measures and prioritizes. You map security outcomes to business outcomes through impact, and you recognize that security can protect value, enable value, and prove responsibility. You balance conflicting drivers through realistic trade-offs, and you measure progress in ways that reflect business outcomes rather than security activity alone. You choose investments by considering which risks threaten the most important drivers, how quickly benefits arrive, and what total costs and friction the investment introduces. When you can do this, you can steer security spending toward choices that are easier to justify, easier to sustain, and more likely to be funded. That is exactly what strategic clarity looks like, and it is a core capability the GSTRT exam is designed to measure.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.